Thank you so much for watching Landumc Goes There. Please subscribe and hit the like button and the bell notification button. Cape Fear is a 1962 psychological thriller that stars Gregory Peck, Robert Mitchum, and Polly Bergen. The movie was adapted by James R. Webb from a 1957 novel called The Executioners that was written by John MacDonald. It was directed by J. Lee Thompson from the storyboards that were devised by the original director Alfred Hitchcock. The storyline goes that after an 8-year prison term for assault, Max Cady, played by Robert Mitchum, is set free. Immediately after this, he makes a beeline for Sam Bowden, played by Gregory Peck, who's the former prosecutor that's responsible for Cady's conviction. Cady informs Sam that he intends to pay the attorney back for his years behind bars. He then starts conducting a meticulous campaign of terror, and at the same time, Cady is careful to stay within the law. Sam realizes that Cady intends to wreak vengeance by assaulting the attorney's wife, played by Polly Bergen, and the daughter, played by Laurie Martin. He does everything he can to put the ex-criminal behind bars, but he has no grounds to do this. Chief Dutton, played by Martin Balsam, tries to help Sam with a few strong-arm tactics against this criminal, but he succeeds only in having the courts take Cady's side in the matter. Things eventually come to a head when Sam moves his family to the safety of a remote houseboat on Cape Fear River. Cady shows up unannounced and is about to ravage Bowden's wife and daughter when Sam turns the tables on him. Principal photography for the film began April 6th and ended in June of 1961. The director envisioned the film in black and white, believing the shooting of the film in color would lessen the atmosphere. As an Alfred Hitchcock fan, he wanted to add this Hitchcockian element to the movie. Things like unusual lighting angles, an eerie musical score, close-ups, and subtle hints rather than graphic depictions of the violence. All of this churning in the mad criminal mind of this offender. The outdoor scenes were filmed on location in Savannah, Georgia, with a very limited amount done there, and we'll get to that in just a bit. The other scenes were filmed in Stockton, California, and the Universal Studios backlot in California. The indoor scenes were shot on Universal sound stages in LA. The scene in which Robert Mitchum attacks Polly Bergen's character on the houseboat was almost entirely improvised and is pretty intense. Before they shot this scene, the director suddenly told some crew members to bring him a dish of eggs. He then decided to have Mitchum rubbing these eggs on Bergen's character. This was all not scripted at all, and the reactions that he got from Polly were completely real. She also suffered some back injuries from being knocked around so much by Mitchum, which she felt the impact for many days after the filming. At one point during this scene, Mitchum cut his hand open, and he became covered in blood. He ended up spreading this blood on Polly's back, and they just kept filming the scene. They were both so involved in the scene, the cast and crew didn't want to let this physical element stop them. In the source novel, The Executioners, Cady was a soldier court-martialed and convicted on then Lieutenant Bowden's testimony for the brutal attack on a 14-year-old girl. Initially, this same premise was going to be used, but the censors stepped in because they didn't like the idea of a 14-year-old actually being assaulted by this criminal, and that it would adversely affect the U.S. military personnel in their depiction of this happening. Gregory Peck not only starred in the film, he produced it, along with his production company, Melville Productions. He didn't like the original novel's title of The Executioners and was drawn to the idea of a new title by being aware that movies that were named after places tended to be more successful. So he got a map of the U.S. down, and it just so happened that his eyes glanced down on Cape Fear, North Carolina. At first, Robert Mitchum didn't want to do the film at all, but he finally relented after Gregory Peck and the director delivered a case of bourbon to his home. His reply to this to them was, "Okay, I've drunk your bourbon. I'm drunk. I'll do the picture." They didn't really get along during this film at all, though, and that's really made obvious when later on Gregory Peck spoke of Robert Mitchum and said that I gave him a role. I paid him a lot of money to do it, and it was obviously a better role than I had. I thought he would understand that, but that Mitchum thought that he apparently acted me off the screen. And Gregory Peck said that he didn't think very highly of him for that. The film contains one of the few instances of a correct depiction of what someone sees when they're looking through binoculars. In most films, what you see is shown to resemble a sideways figure 8, more or less side-by-side magnified images. But what one really sees is a single round magnified image, which is the same thing that you see when looking through the eyepiece of a telescope. The director was really irritated by the UK censors, as he felt that they had ruined the film by making extensive cuts in it. The number of edits they made were between the range of from 60 to over 100, which basically totaled over 6 minutes. These edits removed the threatening dialogue and assault references that Katie made about his attack on Peggy, and also the shots of him staring longingly at the daughter Nancy. Eventually, all these cuts were restored into the UK's releases. There was still a lot of things chopped out of this film that were considered key elements. There was a lot of the fight scene that was removed. And the biggest thing was the implication that Katie planned to sexually assault and torture both Peggy and Nancy. These deletions were never restored into a film print. According to Robert Mitchum, during the filming of the final fight scene between him and Gregory Peck, Peck once accidentally punched him for real. Mitchum, knowing that Peck didn't mean to do it, and being ever the professional, refused to break character and continued on filming the scene. Upon eventually entering his trailer, Mitchum said that he literally collapsed due to the impact from that punch, and he said that he felt it for days afterwards. He then made the statement that he didn't feel sorry for anyone dumb enough to pick a fight with Gregory Peck. Peck and Mitchum were completely different personalities. Peck was always prepared meticulously for his role, while Mitchum learned his lines only before a scene. And this was because he had a fantastic photographic memory. But one thing that really shook the production up with Robert Mitchum was that he had a real-life aversion to Savannah, Georgia, where as a teenager, he had been charged with vagrancy and put on a chain gang. This was something he never really quite got over, and he couldn't do much filming there at all. He was still too shook up by the memories. The production had to pick things up and move things for the outdoor scenes so that they could be shot at Ladd's Marina in Stockton, California, including the conflict of the houseboat at the end of the film. Upon the film's release, it received positive reviews and almost cautious feedback from the critics due to the film's content. It was described as a great thriller powered by Robert Mitchum's chilling performance and the fact that it's one of those shockers that provokes disgust and regret. Take another look at this great film from 1962. I think you'll really enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.